Sarah McKinnon was always different from the other women in Copper Creek, Arizona. Her curves made the town whisper, and her confidence made them afraid. When the townspeople finally snapped, they did the unthinkable. They chained her to the old oak tree outside of town, leaving her to the mercy of the desert sun. But they didn't count on James Blackwood, the richest rancher in the territory, finding her there. One look at the cruelty before him, and James knew he had to act. As he reached for those chains, he wasn't just saving a woman. He was challenging everything his world believed in. But can two outsiders find love while fighting against a town determined to destroy them? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 1 week earlier, Sarah's fingers traced the worn leather binding of her mother's diary, its pages yellow with age. The morning sun streamed through her bedroom window, casting long shadows across the wooden floor of her modest home on the outskirts of Copper Creek. She'd read the passages so many times she knew them by heart. "My dearest Sarah," her mother had written, "in a world that seeks to shrink us, stand tall. Your beauty is your strength, not your shame." The words brought both comfort and pain. Her mother had faced the same whispers, the same judgmental stares. But times were supposed to be different now. It was 1885, not 1855. Sarah closed the diary and stood, straightening her riding clothes. She had horses to train, and she wouldn't let the town's small-mindedness keep her from doing what she loved. At the stables, Sarah worked her magic. Wild mustangs grew calm under her touch. Spooked horses learned trust again. Her methods were different, gentler, more intuitive than the harsh braking techniques others used. And that was part of the problem. Unnatural, they called it, the way she could calm a horse with just her presence. Unseemly, they whispered, when she rode astride instead of side saddle. But it was her curves that drew the most vicious comments, as if her very shape was an act of defiance against proper society. Tommy Parker brought his new stallion in that morning, a magnificent beast with wild eyes and a nervous disposition. Nobody else could get near him, Tommy admitted, keeping his eyes carefully averted from Sarah's figure. "But they say you have a way." Sarah approached the horse slowly, her voice soft and melodious. "Hey there, beautiful," she crooned, letting the stallion catch her scent. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." The horse's ears flicked forward, interest overcoming fear. Within minutes, Sarah had her hand on his neck, stroking gently. Tommy watched in amazement as the supposedly untamable stallion nuzzled into her touch. "Miss McKinnon!" The sharp voice of Mrs. Abigail Whitmore, head of the town council, shattered the peaceful moment. The stallion startled, but Sarah maintained her calm, keeping him steady. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah replied evenly, not taking her eyes off the horse. She could feel the older woman's disapproving glare boring into her back. "We've had complaints," Mrs. Whitmore announced, her voice clipped, "about your inappropriate attire and behavior. This is a respectable town." Sarah finally turned, one hand still on the stallion's neck. Her riding clothes were practical. Pants for safety, a fitted shirt that allowed movement, nothing scandalous except to those who found a woman's natural form offensive. "I'm working, Mrs. Whitmore. These clothes keep me safe while handling horses. Would you prefer I risk injury to satisfy propriety?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably between them, clutching his hat. Mrs. Whitmore's face tightened with displeasure. "You're setting a dangerous example for the young ladies of this town. First the clothes, then the independent living, the unwomanly work. We've been lenient because of your father's memory, but enough is enough." Sarah felt her mother's words echo in her mind. "Stand tall. My work speaks for itself," she said firmly. "Every horse I train, every rider I teach, they trust me because of my skill, not my appearance." "You have until Sunday to make appropriate changes," Mrs. Whitmore declared, "or the council will be forced to take action." She turned on her heel and strode away, leaving a heavy silence in her wake. Tommy cleared his throat. "Miss McKinnon, I'm sorry about all that. What you did with Kaiser here, It's amazing. Sarah managed a small smile. Thank you, Tommy. Let's focus on getting Kaiser comfortable with a saddle, shall we? But as she worked through the morning, Sarah couldn't shake the weight of Mrs. Whitmore's threat. Her mother's diary had warned of this, how fear could turn a community against its own. Her mother had chosen to leave to start fresh elsewhere, but this was Sarah's home, her father's legacy. She wouldn't be driven out by small minds and smaller hearts. That evening, she lit a lamp and opened the diary again, finding the entry. From just before her mother left, "My darling girl, they fear what they don't understand. A woman who owns her beauty, who stands in her power, it threatens their careful order. But remember, your body is not a scandal. Your strength is not a sin. You come from a line of women who refuse to be less than they were. Whatever you choose, choose it standing tall." Sarah closed the diary gently. Sunday was 4 days away, 4 days to decide, bend to their will or face whatever punishment they deemed appropriate. Her fingers brushed the diary's worn cover, feeling the strength of generations within its pages. She would not bend. Whatever came, she would face it standing tall, just as her mother had taught her. Sunday arrived with storm clouds gathering on the horizon, nature itself seeming to sense the tension in Copper Creek. Sarah sat in the back of the town hall, her spine straight as a rail, watching as the council members filed in with their official decree papers. The wooden benches filled quickly with townsfolk, their whispers like dry leaves scratching across the floor. Mrs. Whitmore took her place at the podium, her grey hair pulled severely back, her mouth a thin line of righteousness. "We are gathered today to address a matter of public morality," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Miss Sarah McKinnon has been given ample opportunity to correct her inappropriate behavior." Sarah felt the weight of every stare, but she didn't shrink. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Stand tall." "The council has documented numerous complaints," Mrs. Whitmore continued, lifting an official-looking paper. "Indecent attire, unsuitable conduct, corrupting influences on our young women. Miss McKinnon has chosen to ignore our warnings, to flout our traditions." From the crowd, young Betty Wilson, one of Sarah's riding students, stood up. "But Miss McKinnon taught me to be brave. She showed me I could—" "Sit down, child." Betty's mother yanked her back to the bench. "This is exactly the sort of influence we're talking about." Sarah's heart ached for Betty, seeing the girl's eyes fill with tears. But before she could speak, Reverend Clark stepped forward. "I've seen girls as young as 12 beginning to emulate Miss McKinnon's style of dress," he intoned gravely. "They speak of independence, of choosing their own paths. This defiance of natural order cannot continue." The council members nodded, in solemn agreement. Sarah finally rose, her voice clear and steady. "My work helps this community. Every horse I gentle, every rider I teach." "Silence!" Mrs. Whitmore slammed her hand on the podium. "Your work, as you call it, is no excuse for moral corruption. The council has reached its decision." She unfurled the decree, its official seal gleaming in the lamplight. "Sarah McKinnon, you are hereby declared a public nuisance and moral hazard. Until you demonstrate proper feminine modesty and behavior, you will be barred from conducting business within town limits." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah stood her ground. "You can't do this. I have contracts, obligations. Furthermore," Mrs. Whitmore continued, her voice rising, "to prevent further corruption of our youth, you will be restricted from public spaces where your influence might spread." "This is madness," Sarah protested. "You're punishing me for existing in my own skin." "Remove her," Mrs. Whitmore ordered. 2 men stepped forward, the sheriff's deputies looking uncomfortable but determined. Sarah backed away. "Don't touch me. I'll leave on my own." But as she turned to go, she heard Mrs. Whitmore's final pronouncement. "The council has determined that mere restrictions are insufficient. More dramatic measures are required to demonstrate the consequences of such brazen defiance." Sarah never saw who struck the first blow. There was a sudden rush of movement, hands grabbing her arms, voices raised in righteous fervor. She fought, but there were too many. The last thing she saw was Betty Wilson's terrified face as they dragged her from the hall. Through it all, the decree lay on the podium, its official language sanitizing the brutality it authorized. To be made an example of by such methods as the council deems necessary for the moral protection of the community. They took her in the night, away from prying eyes, to the old oak tree outside of town. The chains were cold against her skin, their metallic clink a mockery of justice. As they left her there, Mrs. Whitmore stepped close one last time. "When you're ready to accept your proper place," she whispered, "to dress and behave as a lady should, you'll be released." Sarah lifted her chin, meeting the older woman's gaze. "My proper place is wherever I choose to stand." Mrs. Whitmore's face hardened. "Then stand here until hunger and shame teach you better." She turned away, leading the others back toward town, leaving Sarah alone with the rising moon and the weight of the chains. But even bound to the oak, Sarah refused to bow her head. The chains might hold her body, but they couldn't chain her spirit. She was her mother's daughter, and she would face whatever came standing tall. Dawn came with cruel clarity, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Sarah's wrists were raw, where the iron chains had chafed through the night. Each link a cold reminder of the town's judgment. The old oak's rough bark pressed against her back, offering neither comfort nor mercy. The morning stage rumbled past on the distant road, kicking up dust. Sarah watched it disappear over the horizon, carrying travelers who would never know what darkness lurked in Copper Creek's proper facade. Her throat was already dry, the desert sun climbing higher with merciless intent. A rattlesnake slithered past, tongue flicking out to taste the air. Sarah remained perfectly still, remembering her father's lessons about desert creatures. "They're more afraid of you than you are of them," he'd always said. "Like the townspeople," she thought bitterly, afraid of anything different. Anything they couldn't control. The sound of approaching hooves made her heart leap, but it was only young Tommy Parker, riding wide around the tree on his way to town. He couldn't meet her eyes, his face a mask of shame as he urged his horse faster. "Coward," Sarah whispered, her voice rough from thirst. But she understood his fear. Standing up to the likes of Mrs. Whitmore meant risking everything. Reputation, livelihood, acceptance. The chains clinked as she shifted, trying to find a less painful position. They'd left just enough slack for her to sit or stand, a mockery of mercy. The metal had warmed in the sun, but that only made it worse, like wearing bands of fire around her wrists. A covey of quail scattered through the scrub brush, their quiet calls a reminder of the life that continued despite human cruelty. Sarah watched them, remembering mornings spent riding these same lands, feeling free and strong. Now, the desert she loved had become her prison. Mid-morning brought the first townspeople, drawn by morbid curiosity. They kept their distance, whispering. Behind raised hands, Sarah recognized Mrs. Peterson from the general store, who'd always praised her way with horses. Now the woman hurried past, pulling her young daughter close, as if Sarah's condition might be catching. The girl stared, wide-eyed, until her mother jerked her away. "That's what happens to women who don't know their place," Sarah heard her say. The words cut deeper than the chains. Sweat trickled down Sarah's back, her clothes offering little protection from the rising heat. She'd lost feeling in her fingers, but she forced them to move, refusing to let the chains win. Every small defiance mattered. A prairie hawk circled. Overhead, its cry echoing across the empty landscape. Sarah envied its freedom, its indifference to human rules and restrictions. The bird answered only to the sky, the wind, its own wild nature. "Miss McKinnon?" A small voice startled her. "Betty." Wilson stood a few yards away, clutching a cloth-wrapped bundle. She glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Betty, you shouldn't be here," Sarah managed, though her heart warmed at the girl's courage. "I brought water," Betty whispered, creeping closer. "And some bread. I can't reach high enough to—" "Go home, Betty." Sarah's voice was firm but gentle. You've shown more bravery than any of them, but I won't let you risk their anger. Go on now." Tears spilled down Betty's cheeks as she backed away, leaving the bundle just out of Sarah's reach. The sight of it, salvation so close yet impossible to grasp, was another kind of torture. The sun climbed higher, and Sarah retreated into memories. Her mother's voice reading from her diary. Her father teaching her to gentle wild horses. The first time she'd ridden astride, feeling the power and freedom of moving as one with her horse. The chains couldn't touch those memories. They couldn't change who she was, who she'd chosen to be. Each link represented their fear, their need to control, their desperate clinging to outdated ideas. But chains could be broken. Iron could be overcome. As afternoon heat shimmered across the desert, Sarah began to sing, softly at first, then stronger. The lullaby her mother had taught her, about a wild mare running free under endless stars. Let them hear, let them know that chains might bind her body, but her spirit remained unbroken. The old oak's leaves rustled above her, nature's accompaniment to her act of defiance. She was Sarah McKinnon, her mother's daughter, her father's legacy, and she would not be broken by iron or ignorance. James Blackwood pulled his gold pocket watch from his vest, its polished surface catching the afternoon sun. The elegant timepiece had been his father's final gift, a reminder that true wealth lay not in gold, but in how a man chose to spend his time. The stage was running 2 hours late, and Copper Creek looked like every other small-minded town he'd passed through on his way west. The watch's lid snapped shut with a decisive click. He'd built the largest cattle empire in the territory, by seeing potential where others saw only dust and limitation. This town would be no different, assuming its people could be reasoned with. "Mr. Blackwood, sir," the stagecoach driver called down. "Sorry for the delay. Broke an axle back near—" James waved away the apology, his attention caught by the unusual silence of the town's main street. Every face that peered out from shops and walkways seemed to carry the same wary tension. "Something wrong in town?" he asked the driver, who suddenly became very interested in adjusting the horse's reins. "Not my place to say, sir. Best speak to Mrs. Whitmore at the town council if you're looking to do business here." James's fingers traced the edge of his watch chain thoughtfully. He'd learned to read people like others read ledger books, and everything about this town's atmosphere spoke of secrets and shame. The Silver Dollar Saloon offered the best vantage point for observation, and James settled at a corner table with a clear view of the street. The whiskey was awful, but the gossip proved invaluable. Showed her what proper women do. Chained up like a wild animal. Blackwood himself coming to invest. That McKinnon girl had it coming. James's hand stilled on his glass. The fragments of conversation painted an ugly picture, one he'd seen too often in his travels. Small towns and their small judgments, using propriety as a weapon. The bartender, an older man with kind eyes, seemed less caught up in the righteous fervor. James beckoned him over. "Tell me about the McKinnon girl," he said quietly, sliding across a generous tip. The bartender glanced around before leaning in. "Sarah McKinnon, best horse trainer in 3 territories, but she doesn't fit their mold of what a woman should be. Town council." He shook his head. "They did something terrible. Used her as an example." James checked his watch again, a habit that helped him mask his reactions. "Where?" "Old Oak, out past the North Road. But mister, if you're thinking of getting involved—" James stood, leaving payment for the drink. "I've found that involvement is the only cure for injustice." The afternoon heat hit him like a physical wall as he stepped outside. His horse, a magnificent black stallion, waited patiently at the hitching post. As he mounted, Mrs. Whitmore herself emerged from the town hall, her face a study in practiced authority. "Mr. Blackwood, we've been expecting you. The council is ready to discuss your investment proposal." "Later, madam." His voice carried the weight of wealth and influence, stopping her short. "I find I need to survey the outskirts first. Get a feel for the moral character of the region." Her face paled slightly. Mr. Blackwood, surely the council chambers would be more comfortable. But he was already riding away, his watch secure in his vest pocket, each tick marking time toward a confrontation that would shake Copper Creek to its foundations. The old oak was visible from a distance, its ancient branches reaching toward the merciless sky. And beneath it, a sight that made James's jaw clench. A woman chained like a criminal, her head unbowed despite the obvious suffering she'd endured. He dismounted slowly, years of business negotiations having taught him the value of careful approach. Sarah McKinnon lifted her head to watch him, and James saw not a victim, but a warrior. Despite the dirt and sweat, despite the chains, her eyes held a fierce dignity that stirred something deep in his soul. His pocket watch ticked steadily, marking the moment when everything would change. Not just for Sarah or for James himself, but for a town that desperately needed to be dragged into a new era. "Miss McKinnon," he said softly, removing his hat, "I believe we have a great deal to discuss about the future of Copper Creek." The watch marked each second of silence between them, counting down to a revolution that would begin with the breaking of chains and end with the shattering of centuries of prejudice. James Blackwood had come to Copper Creek looking for a business opportunity. Instead, he'd found a cause worth fighting for, and a woman strong enough to lead the charge. The bolt cutters gleamed in James's saddlebag, their steel jaws catching the late afternoon light. He'd started carrying them years ago, after finding too many gates locked against progress, too many fences built to keep people in their supposed place. "They'll come after you too," Sarah warned, her voice hoarse from thirst. "Copper Creek doesn't take kindly to those who defy its rules." James pulled his canteen free, holding it carefully to her cracked lips. "Let them come. I've dealt with worse than small-town tyrants." The water was warm but clean, and Sarah drank deeply. When she finished, her eyes met his with unwavering directness. "Why are you doing this?" Instead of answering immediately, James reached for the bolt cutters. Their weight was familiar in his hands, solid and certain as his purpose. "My mother was like you," he said quietly. "Too bold, too beautiful, too unwilling to shrink herself to suit others. They didn't chain her to a tree, but they broke her spirit other ways." The first chain snapped with a sharp crack that echoed across the desert. Sarah's right hand fell free, blood slowly returning to her fingers. "I swore I'd never stand by and watch it happen to another woman," James continued, moving to the second. "A chain, no matter the cost." Sarah flexed her freed hand, wincing at the pain. "Your investment plans can wait." The second chain gave way. "Some things matter more than money." Sarah stumbled as the last restraint fell away, her legs weak from standing. James caught her arm, supporting but not confining. The difference wasn't lost on her. "My horses," she said, trying to take a step. "My home will still be here, after you've recovered." James's voice was firm. "Right now, you need medical attention and safe shelter." A cloud of dust on the horizon caught their attention, riders approaching from town. News traveled fast in places like Copper Creek. "They're coming," Sarah said, but there was no fear in her voice, only determination. James helped her mount his stallion, then swung up behind her, the bolt cutters he left at the base of the tree, a message and a warning to those who would follow. "Hold tight," he murmured, and felt her straighten against him, refusing to slump even in her exhaustion. The stallion responded to his touch, turning toward the open desert. "My mother's diary," Sarah said suddenly. "In my house. I can't leave it." "We'll come back for it," James promised, "and for everything else they tried to take from you. But first, we ride." The horses' hooves struck sparks from the rocky ground as they rode away from the old oak, each stride carrying them further from chains and closer to freedom. Behind them, the riders from town grew larger, shouts carrying on the wind. Sarah's laugh startled him, rough from thirst but genuine. Mrs. Whitmore must be beside herself, the town's most eligible investor, running off with their moral disgrace. "Let them talk." James guided the horse around a patch of cacti. "I've found that those who chain others are usually the ones most bound by their own fears." The sun was setting now, painting the desert in fierce oranges and purples. Sarah's body gradually relaxed against him as exhaustion took its toll, but her spine remained straight, her dignity intact. The bolt cutters lay behind them, their job complete. But James knew that the harder work lay ahead, breaking the invisible chains of prejudice and fear that bound not just Sarah, but an entire town. For now, though, there was only the rhythm of hooves, the vast desert ahead, and the weight of a brave woman finally free to be herself. James smiled into the gathering dark. Sometimes the best investments weren't in cattle or land, but in the courage to stand against injustice. The riders behind them were falling back, unwilling to pursue too far from their safe, familiar boundaries. Their shouts faded into the desert wind, replaced by the whisper of sagebrush and the promise of change coming to Copper Creek, one broken chain at a time. The Blackwood Ranch emerged from the darkness like a mirage, its sprawling buildings softly lit by lanterns. Sarah, barely conscious after the long ride, registered the sweet smell of alfalfa and the gentle sounds of cattle in the night. Strong. Hands helped her down from the horse, and she fought to stay upright, unwilling to show weakness even now. "Maria!" James called out, supporting Sarah's weight. "Bring the medicine chest, and wake Rosa." An older Mexican woman appeared on the porch, her dark eyes taking in the situation quickly. She disappeared inside, returning moments later with a wooden chest, decorated with intricate Native American designs. "Madre de Dios," Maria breathed, seeing Sarah's condition. "This way, quickly." They led Sarah into a comfortable bedroom where an elderly woman waited. Rosa's weathered face spoke of Apache heritage, her hands steady as she opened the medicine chest. "The chains?" Rosa asked simply, removing a clay jar filled with dark salve. "Cut," James replied. "But her wrists?" Rosa nodded, uncapping the jar. A pungent, earthy smell filled the room. Desert sage, yucca, and other herbs Sarah couldn't identify. "My grandmother's medicine," Rosa explained, her accent thick but warm. "For healing body and spirit." The salve stung at first, then brought blessed numbness to Sarah's raw wrists. Rosa worked in silence, her gentle touches carrying decades of inherited wisdom. Maria bustled about with water and clean cloths, murmuring prayers in Spanish. "Your people?" Sarah managed, watching Rosa's sure movements. "They understand about being judged by others." Rosa's hands paused briefly. "See, and about surviving, about keeping our ways, our strength." She resumed, applying the salve. "This medicine, the white doctors call it superstition, but it heals." James stood in the doorway, his presence protective, but not possessive. Rosa's grandmother was the local healer before the town decided they were too civilized for traditional medicine. "Their loss," Sarah whispered, feeling the salve's magic working through her pain. "Their fear," Rosa corrected, "of women who know things, who hold power in their hands." She secured light bandages around Sarah's wrists. "Like you with your horses." A commotion arose outside, voices approaching hooves. James straightened. "Stay with her," he told the women, striding out to meet the disturbance. Maria moved to close the heavy curtains, but Sarah stopped her. "No, I want to see." Through the window, she watched James confront 3 riders in the yard. Even at this distance, she recognized Sheriff Mills's distinctive hat. "This is private property," James's voice carried clearly in the night air. "We've come for the McKinnon woman," Mills replied. "This doesn't concern you, Blackwood." "Everything on my land concerns me." James's tone could have frozen water, including those who trespass on it. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "The town council has no authority here, or have they forgotten who holds the water rights they depend on?" Rosa's soft chuckle drew Sarah's attention. The older woman's eyes gleamed with approval. "He is like the wolf," she said, securing the last bandage. "Fierce when protecting his own. I'm not his to protect," Sarah murmured. "No." Rosa packed away her medicines. "You are your own, but even the strongest need allies." She pressed the clay jar into Sarah's hands. "Keep this." Use it for the outer wounds. For the inner ones, she touched Sarah's heart. Those heal differently. The jar felt warm, despite its clay surface. Sarah recognized the designs painted on it, similar to those on the medicine chest, telling stories of healing and renewal. Outside, the sheriff and his men were retreating, their horses' hooves fading into the night. James returned, his face tight with controlled anger. "They won't be the last," he said. "I know." Sarah held up the jar of salve. "But we have medicine." "They don't understand." James's expression softened as he looked between the three women, Sarah holding the Apache medicine, Rosa with her ancient knowledge, Maria with her steadfast faith. Different kinds of strength, different ways of healing. "Rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will bring its own battles." As Sarah settled into the clean bed, Rosa's salve soothing her wounds, she felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Here, surrounded by others who understood what it meant to be different, to be judged, she could finally let her guard down. The medicine jar sat on the bedside table, its symbols catching the lamplight, a reminder that healing came in many forms, and that sometimes the best medicine was finding those who accepted you exactly as you were. The letter arrived with the morning sun, carried by a nervous young ranch hand who'd been stopped on the road to town. The paper was expensive, the kind Mrs. Whitmore used for official council business, but the words it contained were far from civilized. James read it at his desk, his face darkening with each line. Sarah stood by the window, Rosa's salve cool on her healing wrists, watching his reaction. "They're threatening to cut all business ties with the ranch," he said finally, "to brand me as a defender of moral corruption to every cattle buyer from here to Kansas City." Sarah's hands clenched. "I should leave." "You've risked enough." "No." James set the letter down with deliberate care. This is exactly the kind of pressure they've used for years to keep everyone in line. Read it yourself." Sarah picked up the letter, the expensive paper somehow feeling dirty in her hands. "Mr. Blackwood, your interference in town matters, and harboring of the McKinnon woman represents a grave threat to the moral fabric of our community. Unless she is returned to face the council's justice, we will be forced to take actions to protect our way of life. Consider carefully whether one woman's defiance is worth the destruction of your business interests in this territory. Let it be known that any who aid her will face similar consequences. The corruption of our youth cannot be tolerated, nor can the flagrant disregard for propriety she represents. You have until sunset tomorrow to make the right choice. Regards, Mrs. Abigail Whitmore, Town Council President." "They're scared," Sarah said, letting the letter fall. "Not just of me, but of what I represent. Freedom has that effect on those who build their power on others' constraints." James stood, moving to a cabinet where he kept his business ledgers. "But they've miscalculated badly." He pulled out several books, laying them open on his desk. "The town's prosperity doesn't rest on their moral authority. It rests on water rights, grazing agreements, and transport contracts." His finger traced down columns of numbers, "all of which pass through this ranch. You'd use that against them. I'd use it for justice. The same way they've used their power for injustice." He looked up at her. "Unless you'd rather I didn't." Sarah touched her bandaged wrists, remembering the bite of chains. "Fighting power with power. It feels like becoming them." Maria appeared. In the doorway, a fresh pot of coffee in her hands. "No, señorita. The difference is in how the power is used. For freedom or for chains." As she poured the coffee, more riders appeared on the road to the ranch. Through the window, Sarah recognized Betty Wilson's father among them, his face grim. "They're trying to rally support," James observed. "Turn the whole town against us." "Against me," Sarah corrected. "Your ranch hands, your workers. They have families in town. This fight could cost them everything." As if to prove her point, they heard raised voices from the bunkhouse. Through the open window came fragments of argument. "Can't risk my kids being outcasts. Ain't right what they did to her. Gotta think of our own." James's jaw tightened. "I won't force anyone to stay, but I won't bow to their threats either." Rosa appeared silently beside Maria. the medicine chest in her arms. "In my village," she said softly, "when the soldiers came to civilize us, some thought surrender would save them. It only taught the soldiers they could take more." Sarah picked up the letter again, feeling the weight of all it represented. "So we fight, but not their way." Her mind worked quickly. "They fear me because I show young women a different path. So let's show them more paths." James raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "Open the ranch, not just to cattle buyers, but to anyone seeking refuge from their moral authority. Other women they've tried to chain, people like Rosa with wisdom they've rejected. Make this place what they fear most, proof that their way isn't the only way." The approaching riders were closer now, dust rising behind their horses. But Sarah stood straighter, her voice growing stronger. "Let them send their threats. Every woman they've silenced, every person they've pushed aside, we'll show them. All that chains can be broken." The morning sun caught the letter's expensive paper, and Sarah deliberately tore it in half. "They wanted to make me an example," she said. "So let's give them one they never expected." The leather-bound manual was worn at the edges, its pages filled with Sarah's careful notes and drawings. Years of observations about horse behavior, training techniques, and the delicate art of building trust, all captured in ink and experience. She hadn't been able to grab it during her ordeal, but James had sent one of his most trusted hands to retrieve it from her house, along with her other essential belongings. Now, standing in the ranch's main corral, Sarah opened the manual to a fresh page. A crowd of ranch hands gathered at the fence, their initial skepticism giving way to curiosity as she approached the newly arrived Mustang, a gorgeous black stallion that had already injured 2 would-be trainers. "The old ways say break their spirit," Sarah explained, letting the stallion catch her scent. "My father taught me different. Watch their spirit, learn from it, work with it." The horse's ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring. Sarah stood quietly, her body language open and calm. Behind her she heard the scratch of pencil on paper. Young Miguel, one of the ranch hands, taking notes. "Every horse speaks," she continued, taking a slow step forward. "Through their ears, their eyes, their movements. The trick isn't dominating them, it's learning their language." The stallion snorted, pawing the ground. Several hands tensed, but Sarah remained steady. She opened her manual, showing Miguel the detailed sketches of horse postures and their meanings. "See how he's testing, not threatening, asking who we are." She took another step. "My manual has 10 years of these conversations. Every success, every failure." The stallion's head lowered slightly, curiosity overtaking caution. Sarah began humming softly, an old technique noted in the margins of her book, passed down from horse traders on the Navajo trails. "Madre de Dios," whispered Maria from the fence, "just like the stories of horse whisperers." Within an hour, Sarah was running her hands along the stallion's neck, speaking softly as the proud animal stood calm and trusting. The ranch hands broke into spontaneous applause, and even the most skeptical among them looked impressed. "The manual?" Miguel asked eagerly. Could I study it sometime?" Sarah smiled, seeing the genuine interest in the young man's eyes. "Better. You can help me add to it. Your people have horse wisdom too, wisdom I'd love to learn." Word spread quickly through the ranch. By afternoon, Sarah had a small group of regular students, not just ranch hands, but their wives and daughters too. The manual became a shared text, with Sarah adding notes about Mexican horse training, traditions and bits of Apache wisdom from Rosa. "You're building something here," James observed that evening, watching Sarah add new sketches to the manual's pages, something more than horse training. Sarah nodded, not looking up from her work. "Knowledge doesn't belong to just one group. Neither does strength." She turned to a fresh page. "Every person who learns these methods, who sees there's another way besides force, they carry that lesson beyond the corral." A commotion at the main gate interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they saw Betty Wilson on her pony, her mother close behind, both looking nervous but determined. "Miss McKinnon," Betty called out. "Pa said we're not supposed to talk to you, but could you teach me about horses, about doing things different?" Sarah met James's eyes, seeing her own hope reflected there. She picked up her manual, feeling its familiar weight. "Come in, Betty. Bring your mother too. I think we all have something to learn from each other." The evening sun caught the gold lettering on the manual's spine, the language of trust, as Sarah walked out to meet her new students. Each page represented more than just horse training now. It was becoming a testament to different ways of seeing, of learning, of being. More riders were approaching the ranch, other townsfolk drawn by rumors of the gentle horse trainer who defied convention. Not all would stay, not all would learn, but as Sarah opened her manual to share its wisdom, she knew that each small change, each mind opened, was another crack in the walls of prejudice. "First lesson," she said to her growing audience, the black stallion grazing peacefully nearby. "True strength doesn't come from breaking spirits. It comes from helping them." Soar. The manual's pages rustled in the evening breeze, ready to record new chapters in the ongoing story of change. Sarah's chains had been meant to make her an example of submission. Instead, they'd become the catalyst for something far more powerful. A revolution of gentle hearts and minds, spreading one lesson at a time. Sheriff Mills's badge caught the late afternoon sun as he dismounted at the ranch gate, the silver star tarnished around its edges. Like the man who wore it, the badge's authority had been slowly corrupted by years of compromise, of looking the other way, while the town council bent justice to their will. "Quite a gathering you've got here, Blackwood," Mills called out, eyeing the dozen or so horses hitched outside the corral. Inside, Sarah was conducting another training session, her voice carrying clear and strong. James stepped down from the porch, positioning himself between the sheriff and the corral. "Folks are free to learn here, Sheriff. No law against that." "No law yet." Mills touched his badge unconsciously. "But the council's meeting tonight. Special session." His eyes tracked the group of women and girls watching Sarah work. Mrs. Whitmore's mighty concerned about the influence being spread here. "Influence?" James's voice hardened. "You mean knowledge? Understanding? The kinds of things that might make people question chains and trees?" The sheriff flinched slightly, his hand dropping from his badge. "You're new here, Blackwood. Don't understand how things work." "Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand how men with badges can forget what they stand for. How silver stars can become weights around the conscience." Inside the corral, Sarah was demonstrating a gentle way to halter a nervous mare. Betty Wilson and 3 other young girls watched intently, their faces bright with learning. Their mothers stood nearby, a mixture of anxiety and wonder in their expressions. "This has to stop," Mills said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. The council doesn't own these people's minds," James cut in, "or their daughters' futures. That badge you wear? It's supposed to protect everyone's rights, not just the ones Mrs. Whitmore approves of." A rider came galloping up, young Tommy Parker, his face flushed with urgency. "Sheriff, they're forming up in town, armed men." Mrs. Whitmore said to, "I'd tell you." "Armed men?" James stepped forward. "For what? Teaching girls about horses?" Mills's hand strayed to his gun, an unconscious gesture that spoke volumes. "Now don't get riled, Blackwood. Just a precaution. The council's worried about disorder." Sarah had noticed the commotion. She secured the mare and walked to the fence, her students trailing behind her. "Disorder, Sheriff? Is that what you call learning, growing, breaking free of chains?" The badge seemed to weigh heavier on Mills's chest as Sarah approached. He'd known her since she was a girl, had even brought his own horse to her for training. "Once, Sarah, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Just stop these gatherings, come back to town, submit to the council's authority." "Like you submitted?" Sarah's voice was quiet but cutting. "Traded your conscience for that star?" The sheriff's face reddened. "You're out of line. No, you're out of line." James moved to stand beside Sarah. "Using armed men against women and children? Is that what that badge means now? More riders were appearing on the road from town, a dozen men, rifles visible on their saddles. Mrs. Whitmore rode with them, her face set in righteous determination. "Get everyone inside," James murmured to Maria, who began quietly shepherding the women and girls toward the house. "Tommy," he called to the young man still sitting his horse, "ride to the north pasture. Tell the men there to come in, now." Mills watched the approaching group, conflict clear on his face. His badge, meant to represent law and justice, had become a symbol of the very oppression it was supposed to prevent. "It's not too late," Sarah said softly. "That star you wear, it could mean something different, could stand for real justice, not just the council's will." The sheriff's hand touched his badge again, feeling its weight. In the distance, Mrs. Whitmore's voice carried on the wind, sharp with authority. The armed men spread out behind her like a gathering storm. "Make your choice, Sheriff," James said. "But remember, that badge carries responsibility, not just power." Mills looked at his approaching posse, then at the women and girls being hurried to safety. His hand dropped from the tarnished star, and for the first time in years he felt its true weight. "God help us all," he muttered, and turned his horse toward the approaching riders. The badge caught the sun one last time, like a question hanging in the desert air. Which side of justice would it serve when the storm finally broke? The garden behind the ranch house was Rosa's pride, a hidden oasis of desert flowers and herbs, carefully tended in the shelter of adobe walls. By moonlight, it became something magical. The night blooming cereus, unfurling its petals like stars fallen to earth. Sarah found James there, after the others had gone to sleep, his tall frame leaning against the wall as he stared at the distant lights of Copper Creek. The sweet scent of evening primrose filled the air, nature's defiance of the desert's harshness. "Thinking about tomorrow?" she asked, moving to stand beside him. "Thinking about choices," he replied, "the ones that shape our lives without us even knowing at the time." He turned to look at her, his face soft in the moonlight, like stopping. At that oak tree, a night bird called somewhere in the darkness. Sarah touched one of Rosa's flowering cacti, marveling at how something so delicate could grow from something so strong. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "Really?" James was quiet for a moment, considering. "I saw myself in that moment, not as I am now, but as I could have been. The man who rides past, who tells himself it's not his concern." His hand found hers. "In the darkness, I didn't like that man. And now, with armed men coming, your business threatened. Now I understand something my father tried to teach me." He led her to a small bench nestled among the flowering plants. "He built our ranch. Empire from nothing, but at the end, he said, true wealth isn't in what you own. It's in what you stand for." Sarah felt the warmth of his hand in hers, so different from the cold chains that had bound her. "Your mother," she said softly. "You mentioned she was like me, strong, beautiful, unwilling to be less than herself." His voice caught slightly. "The town she lived in didn't chain her to a tree. They just chipped away at her spirit piece by piece until she forgot who she was." A cloud passed over the moon, dimming the garden. In the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely, defiant sound. "Is that why you've never married? Fear of watching someone else be broken?" James turned to face her, his eyes intense. "No. I never married because I never met anyone who made me want to stand and fight instead of stand and watch, until now." The moonlight returned, illuminating the garden's beauty. Sarah felt her heart quicken, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not looking to be saved, James Blackwood." "Good." His smile was gentle. "Because I'm not looking to be a savior. I'm looking to be a partner in whatever storm comes." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. Sarah leaned into his hand, feeling the strength and tenderness there. "They'll come at dawn," she whispered. "Let them come." His voice was soft but certain. "Some things are worth fighting for." The night-blooming cereus released its fragrance, sweet and fleeting. Sarah closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that tasted of promise and defiance. His arms went around her, strong but not confining, offering shelter without demanding surrender. When they parted, the moon had risen higher, turning Rosa's garden silver. Somewhere in the house, a child laughed in her sleep, one of the girls, who'd found refuge at the ranch. "Listen," James said, his arms still around Sarah. "That's the sound they fear most. Joy they can't control. Freedom they can't chain." Sarah rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the desert night. "My mother used to say that love is like water in the desert, precious because it's rare, powerful because it creates life where none should exist." The garden stood testament to that truth, roses blooming in dust, beauty thriving against all odds, like their own hearts, opening despite the harshness around them. "Whatever comes tomorrow," Sarah said, "we face it together, not as savior and saved, but as equals." James's answer was another kiss, gentle as moonlight on roses. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, witnesses to love blooming in the desert's heart, defying every force that would keep it from growing. Wild and free, dawn painted the ranch's fence posts blood red, the rough-hewn wood standing like sentinels against the approaching riders. Sarah counted 30 men at least, their rifles glinting in the early light. Mrs. Whitmore rode at their head, her high-necked black dress a banner of righteous authority. James stood at the main gate, one hand resting on the weathered wood. The fence line stretched out on either side, more than just a barrier for cattle now. It marked the boundary between hatred and hope, between the old world and what could be. Behind them, the ranch hands had formed their own line, armed but steady. Miguel stood with his father and brothers, their faces grim. Rosa and Maria had gathered the women and children in the house, but Sarah could see Betty Wilson's face. Pressed against a window, watching, the riders pulled up short of the fence. Sheriff Mills sat uncomfortably on his horse, caught between the two forces he was supposed to keep peace between. "This is your last chance, Blackwood," Mrs. Whitmore called out. "Send out the McKinnon, woman, and end this foolishness." "Foolishness?" James's voice carried clearly across the morning air. "Is that what you call teaching, learning, growing? We call it corruption," someone shouted from the crowd. "Destroying our ways." Sarah stepped forward to stand beside James, her hand finding his. "Your ways destroyed people long enough. Ask your daughters if they want to live in your chains." Mrs. Whitmore's face tightened. "Children don't know what's best for them. That's why God gave them proper authorities to guide them." "Like you guided me?" Sarah's voice rose, with chains and trees and shame. Movement at the fence line caught her attention. Betty Wilson had slipped out of the house, and now she pushed through the ranch hands to stand in front of Sarah. We can't have her," the girl shouted, her young voice trembling but determined. "She teaches us to be strong." "Betty Wilson," her father pushed his horse forward. "Get back in that house right now." "No, Pa." Betty stood straighter. "Miss McKinnon shows us we don't have to be afraid of who we are, that we can be more than just what others want us to be." More figures emerged from the house, women and girls, forming a line along the fence. Sarah recognized faces from town, the seamstress's daughter, the blacksmith's wife, the young widow who lived by the church. "There are children," Mrs. Whitmore's voice rose in fury. "Our wives, you've poisoned their minds. We've opened their eyes," Sarah called back. "The poison was already there, in your rules, your chains, your fear of women who dare to be free." The ranch fence creaked as men shifted in their saddles, some looking uncertainly at the women they'd come to save. Sheriff Mills pushed his horse forward, his badge catching the morning light. "Think carefully," he said, addressing both sides. "Bloodshed here won't wash away easy." "No one needs to bleed," James replied. "This fence marks our land. Cross it with violence, and you're no longer righteous men defending tradition. You're armed attackers threatening women and children." Sarah saw the impact of his words. Some of the men looked away, suddenly uncomfortable with their role in this moral crusade. "The law," Mrs. Whitmore began. The law? James cut in. Let's talk law, Mrs. Whitmore. About water rights this town depends on. About grazing agreements that keep your cattle fed. About contracts that could disappear with one telegram to my lawyers in Denver. A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed with rage. You'd destroy this town's livelihood? For her? For them? James gestured to the line of women and girls along the fence. For every person you've tried to chain, shame, or silence, this fence marks a boundary you've created between fear and freedom. Choose which side you want to be on. The morning sun climbed higher, harsh light revealing the doubt on many faces. Betty's father swung down from his horse, walking slowly to the fence. Betty? He called softly. You really feel that strongly about this? Yes, Pa. Betty's voice was stronger now. Miss McKinnon teaches us that being strong isn't wrong, that we can be brave and still be good. He looked at his daughter for a long moment, then turned to the other riders. My girl's got more sense than all of us. I'm not raising arms against children learning to be strong. More men began dismounting, stepping away from Mrs. Whitmore's crusade. The fence line stood between them like a mirror, reflecting back the truth of what they'd become and what they could choose to be instead. Sarah squeezed James's hand, watching the future balance on the edge of a weathered fence post. The morning wind carried the scent of sage and promise, whispering of change that couldn't be chained. Sarah's lasso hung coiled at her saddle, the rope worn smooth from years of gentle use with frightened horses. She'd never used it as a weapon, until today. As Mrs. Whitmore's remaining loyalists surged forward, Sarah swung into her saddle, the familiar weight of the rope ready at her hip. Take them! Mrs. Whitmore's voice cracked with hysteria. Before they corrupt the whole territory. The first shots fired high, warning shots meant to frighten rather than harm. But Sarah saw James stumble, a bullet splintering the fence post near his head. Without thinking, her lasso spun out, catching the rifle of the nearest attacker, and yanking it from his hands. That's enough, she shouted, the rope already coiling back for another throw. No more weapons, no more force. Face us as equals or leave. Her horse, sensing her intention, moved with perfect precision. The lasso flew again, this time looping around Mrs. Whitmore's waist. Sarah didn't pull. She didn't need to. The message was clear. The woman who had ordered her chained was now at her mercy. How dare you? Mrs. Whitmore sputtered, trying to free herself. This is assault! No, Sarah called back, holding the rope steady. This is justice. The difference is I won't use it to chain you. I'm giving you a choice. Around them, the battle had taken on an almost surreal quality. Ranch hands disarmed the remaining attackers with swift efficiency, while the women from the house formed a human chain across the yard, protecting the children behind them. James had recovered, blood trickling from a scratch on his cheek. Sarah's right, he said, his voice carrying across the chaos. Choose now. All of you. Are you men of violence or men of conscience? The sheriff finally spurred his horse forward, positioning himself between the two groups. His badge caught the morning sun as he drew his pistol, and then slowly, deliberately laid it on the ground. Enough blood, he declared. Enough chains. Mrs. Whitmore, call off your men before someone dies for your pride. Sarah kept the lasso loose but ready, watching Mrs. Whitmore's face contort with the realization that her power was slipping away. The woman who had commanded such fearful respect now looked small, her righteousness crumbling in the face of real strength. You can't win, Sarah told her quietly. Not because of this rope, but because your time is ending. The daughters you tried to keep small are standing tall. The women you tried to silence are finding their voices. Betty Wilson darted out from behind the human chain, running to her father, who had remained neutral by the fence. He scooped her up, holding her close, his eyes full of sudden understanding. My girl, he whispered loud enough for others to hear. What kind of father threatens war to keep his daughter from growing strong? More men lowered their weapons. Mrs. Whitmore's face crumpled as she watched her moral crusade dissolve in the morning light. The town council, she began. "We'll meet today," the sheriff interrupted, "to discuss new leadership. Leadership that understands the difference between tradition and tyranny." Sarah finally loosened her lasso, letting it fall away from Mrs. Whitmore. The rope that had been her tool for gentling wild horses had served a different purpose today, showing that true power lies not in binding others, but in knowing when to let go. The remaining fighters began to retreat, leaving Mrs. Whitmore isolated on her horse. She looked around wildly, seeing former allies backing away, mothers embracing daughters they'd come to save, men choosing love over fear. "This isn't over," she declared, but her voice wavered. "You're right," Sarah agreed, coiling her lasso with practiced ease. "It's just beginning. A new chapter, where girls grow up free and strong, where women stand tall without shame, where power serves justice instead of fear." James moved to stand beside Sarah's horse, his hand resting on her leg. Together, they watched Mrs. Whitmore turn her horse and ride away, her black dress no longer a banner of authority, but a shroud for dying prejudice. The lasso hung quiet now, its work done. Sarah looked at the faces around her, the women standing, proud, the men choosing courage over conformity, the children watching wide-eyed as the world changed before them. The rope that had once been used for gentling horses had helped gentle human hearts instead, proving that the tools of bondage could become instruments of freedom in the right hands. The Copper Creek Gazette's printing press clattered to life, its rhythmic thudding echoing through the early morning streets. Editor Thomas Webb, who had spent years printing Mrs. Whitmore's carefully worded moral guidance columns, now stared at a very different headline: "Chains of Change, the true story of Sarah McKinnon." The article below told everything: the cruel punishment, the resistance at the ranch, the transformation of hearts and minds. But most importantly, it carried the voices that had been silenced for so long. "Miss McKinnon showed me that being strong isn't being bad," read Betty Wilson's quote. "She taught me that a girl can be brave and still be good." More papers arrived from neighboring towns, drawn by rumors of the confrontation. Their headlines ranged from sensational "Frontier Town's War Over Women's Rights" to thoughtful "Change Comes to Copper Creek, a Lesson in Progress." Sarah kept every paper watching. As the story spread beyond their small corner of the territory, letters began arriving at the ranch from other women who had faced similar persecution, from fathers questioning their own rigid beliefs, from young girls dreaming of different futures. "They're calling it the Copper Creek Revolution," James said, spreading the latest papers across his desk. "Though I notice they're a bit unclear on whether you use that lasso for good or ill." Sarah smiled, reading a particularly colorful account from the Denver Post. "Let them wonder. The truth is in the changes we're seeing, and changes there were." The town council, with Sheriff Mills's firm guidance, had suspended Mrs. Whitmore's authority pending a formal review. More women were wearing practical riding clothes without fear of condemnation. The ranch's training sessions had become a legitimate school, with families from 3 territories sending their daughters to learn. "Look at this," James said, holding up a letter. "The governor's wife is interested in visiting. Says it's time these antiquated practices of punishment were addressed territory-wide." The printing press kept churning, each edition of the Gazette marking another step forward. Thomas Webb, finding his conscience along with his courage, began a series of editorials examining the town's history of using shame and isolation to maintain control. "We must ask ourselves," he wrote, "whether tradition that changed the human spirit is tradition worth preserving." Sarah stood in the newspaper office, watching the latest edition take shape. The lead type spelled out yet another story of transformation. The town council's decision to hold new elections, with women eligible to serve for the first time. "Never thought I'd see the day," Webb admitted, adjusting his ink-stained spectacles. "Mind writing a piece for us? About your methods with horses?" Folks are starting to see the connection between gentle training and gentle governance. Outside, Sarah could hear the paper boys already calling out headlines from the previous edition. Copper Creek leads territory in reform. Read all about it. How strange, she thought, that the same papers that had once carried notices of her moral corruption now celebrated her methods as wisdom. The power of words, like the power of chains, depended entirely on how they were used. A group of young girls passed by the newspaper office window, dressed in practical riding clothes, headed for their lessons at the ranch. They walked tall, unburdened by shame. Sarah watched them go, remembering her own youth, the weight of judgment, the constant pressure to be less. Your story gave them permission to write their own, Webb said, following her gaze. That's what Mrs. Whitmore never understood. You can't chain a story once it's been told. The printing press continued its steady rhythm, like a heartbeat of change. Each edition carried more voices, more stories of transformation. Women who had silently endured similar treatment began to speak out. Men who had enforced the old ways began to question them. We're not just printing news anymore, Webb observed, holding up the fresh pages. We're printing possibility. Sarah touched the still wet ink, feeling the slight impression of the type. Like the marks left by chains, these impressions would last. But they would tell a different story. A story of breaking free, of standing tall, of changing not just laws, but hearts. The papers spread out across the territory like seeds in the wind, taking root in other towns, other territories, growing into something that couldn't be chained or contained. The simple revolutionary idea that every person deserved to stand free and strong in their own truth. The new town charter lay open on the council chamber table, its fresh ink gleaming in the lamplight. The document represented weeks of careful negotiation, each article crafted to prevent the abuses of the past while building toward a more inclusive future. Article 1, Sarah read aloud to the packed chamber, her voice steady. No citizen of Copper Creek shall be subject to punishment without due process of law. No council, committee, or individual shall have the power to impose extra-legal sanctions or physical restraints upon any person. She paused, meeting Mrs. Whitmore's eyes across the table. The older woman sat quietly in the audience now, her authority stripped away by unanimous vote. But it was her presence here, her willingness to face what she had done, that gave Sarah hope. Article 2, James continued, the right to pursue honest work, education, and personal development shall not be restricted based on gender, appearance, or manner of dress, provided such choices do not harm others. Betty Wilson's father stood up. I move to add, and parents shall be guided by conscience and love, not fear and tradition, in raising their children. The room murmured approval. Sarah watched faces in the crowd, men who had once ridden, armed to the ranch now nodding thoughtfully, women who had turned away from her in shame, now sitting tall and proud. Tell them about Article 7, Sheriff Mills urged. He had become one of the strongest advocates for change, his tarnished badge now shining with renewed purpose. Sarah turned the page. Article 7. A permanent commission shall be established, comprising equal numbers of men and women, to review any accusations of moral or social misconduct. No punitive action may be taken without this commission's approval. And the chair of this commission, James prompted, will be Sarah McKinnon, Mills announced, if she'll accept. The room grew quiet. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, the symmetry of it, from chained outcast to guardian of justice. She looked at Mrs. Whitmore again, seeing not an enemy now, but a reminder of why such protections were necessary. I accept, she said clearly, but with one condition. Mrs. Whitmore must serve as co-chair. Gasps and whispers filled the chamber. Mrs. Whitmore's head snapped up, her face a mask of confusion. The old ways and the new must learn to work together, Sarah explained. We can't build a better future by simply exchanging one form of judgment for another. She walked to where Mrs. Whitmore sat, offering her hand. Your experience, tempered by understanding of what went wrong, could help prevent others from making the same mistakes. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes glistened with tears. After what I did to you, the charter is about redemption as much as reform, Sarah said softly. Will you help us make it work? The older woman stood slowly, taking Sarah's offered hand. I will try, she whispered. God help me, I will try. They returned to the charter together, its pages containing hope for healing as well as change. Article by article, the document redrew the boundaries of power and responsibility in Copper Creek. James watched from his place at the table, seeing his father's wisdom prove true. Real wealth lay not in what you owned, but in what you stood for. The charter would protect his business interests, yes, but more importantly, it would protect the human spirit's right to grow and flourish. One final article, he said, standing, regarding the old oak tree. Sarah tensed slightly, but her voice remained strong. Read it. The tree known as the Judgment Oak shall be preserved, James read, not as a place of punishment, but as a monument to resilience. A plaque shall be placed there reading, Here stood those who dared to be different. May their courage teach us to break chains, not forge them. Betty Wilson, sitting with her parents, burst into applause. Others joined until the chamber rang. With it, not celebration of victory, but acknowledgement of transformation. The charter's final page waited for signatures. One by one, townspeople came forward, former opponents and supporters alike, to sign their names to this new beginning. Each signature represented a choice to change, to grow, to see differently. Sarah signed last, her name flowing strong and free across the page. Above them all, in careful script, ran the charter's simple preamble. We, the people of Copper Creek, choosing justice over judgment, growth over fear, and hope over hatred, do hereby establish these articles of mutual respect and protection. The document was complete, but Sarah knew the real work was just beginning. True change happened not on paper, but in hearts and minds. The charter was just the first step on a long road of redemption. The engagement ring caught the sunset's light. Its simple gold band, holding not a diamond, but a smooth piece of polished wood from the old oak tree. James had commissioned it specially, working with both the town's jeweler and a native craftsman from Rosa's tribe. A reminder, he said, holding it out to Sarah as they stood in the garden where they'd first kissed, that beauty comes in unexpected forms and strength grows from adversity. Sarah touched the smooth wood inlay, feeling its warmth. You understand, don't you, that I won't be a traditional wife? Traditional? James smiled. Like those society women in Denver who've never broken a wild horse or reformed a whole town, I think I'll survive the scandal. The ring slipped onto her finger perfectly, its weight familiar though she'd never worn one before. Like everything. Between them it represented partnership rather than possession. The ranch hands are taking bets, Sarah said, admiring how the wood grain caught the light. Half think I'll wear a proper dress for the wedding. The other half expect me in riding clothes. And what do you expect? I expect to be myself. The woman you fell in love with, not the woman others think I should be. James pulled her close. The garden's evening primrose releasing its sweet scent around them. The woman I fell in love with rewrote a town's laws, gentled wild horses, and taught me that true strength lies in lifting others up, not holding them down. Inside the house, they could hear preparations for the engagement celebration. Maria's voice carried through the open windows, directing the setup of food and decorations. The whole town had been invited, even those who had once stood against them. Are you sure about making it so public? Sarah asked. There are still those who need to see that love doesn't follow rules, James finished. That's exactly why it should be public. They walked back inside to find the house transformed. Rosa had woven wildflowers into garlands, their desert beauty defying any notion of proper decorations. Betty Wilson and the other girls from Sarah's training school had created their own decorations, paper chains painted in bright colors, symbolizing the transformation of bonds into beauty. Mrs. Whitmore arrived early, carrying a covered dish, and uncertainly. Since agreeing to co-chair the commission, she'd shown small but significant changes. Now, she approached Sarah with something like admiration in her eyes. "I brought my grandmother's honey cake," she said softly. "It's not traditional for engagements, but—" She glanced at Sarah's ring with its wooden inlay. "I thought perhaps we were making new traditions." More townspeople arrived, filling the house with a buzz of conversation and laughter. Sarah saw Thomas Webb from the Gazette taking notes. No doubt tomorrow's paper would carry a full account of how the infamous Sarah McKinnon's engagement party broke all the proper rules. The sheriff arrived in his best suit, his badge polished to a new shine. He'd brought his wife and daughters, the latter wearing riding clothes similar to Sarah's students. The sight would have scandalized the town just months ago. Now it barely raised an eyebrow. "A toast!" called Miguel, raising his glass. The young ranch hand had become one of their most vocal supporters. "To the couple who taught us that love doesn't chain, it frees." "To Sarah and James," the crowd echoed, and Sarah felt the warmth of acceptance wash over her. Betty Wilson tugged at her sleeve. "Miss McKinnon, Pa says I can keep taking lessons after you're married, that I can learn to run the ranch someday. Just like you." Sarah knelt to the girl's level, her ring catching the lamplight. "You can learn to do anything, Betty, and someday, when you find someone to love, they'll love you for your strength, not despite it." James came up behind her, resting his hand on her shoulder. The gesture spoke volumes: support without possession, partnership without dominance. "Actually," he said to Betty, "we're expanding the school. The governor's wife isn't just visiting. She's helping us establish a proper academy for young women, training in everything from horsemanship to business management." Sarah stood, leaning into his touch. "Really? You didn't tell me. Wanted it to be an engagement gift. The papers are in my office. Equal partnership, your name right beside mine." The ring felt warmer somehow, its wooden heart carrying the promise of growth and change. Around them, the celebration continued, not just of their engagement, but of everything it represented. Love that accepted rather than confined. Strength that lifted rather than limited. Trust that freed rather than fettered. "Dance with me," James said softly as Miguel and his brothers struck up a tune. "Show them all what partnership looks like." And so they danced, her riding boots and his polished shoes moving together across the floor, while the ring on her finger caught the light like a star fallen to earth, a beacon of hope for all who dared to love freely, fully, and without chains. The joint deed to the Blackwood Ranch lay on the lawyer's desk, fresh ink glistening on the signatures that gave Sarah equal ownership of everything: the land, the cattle, the newly established women's academy. But it was the additional clause that meant the most. "All decisions regarding ranch operations and academy management shall require mutual agreement of both parties." "It's unprecedented," the lawyer admitted, adjusting his spectacles. "Married women don't typically hold property rights, let alone equal management authority." "Then we'll set a new precedent," James replied, watching Sarah trace her name on the document, "just like we've been doing all along." Wedding preparations swirled around them, but this quiet moment of legal partnership felt more significant than any ceremony could be. The deed represented everything they'd fought for: equality, respect, shared purpose. "The Academy already has 12 applications," Sarah said, reading through the papers. "Girls from as far as Kansas City, wanting to learn ranching and business. And horse training," James added with a smile. "Your reputation has spread. The Army's interested in your gentling methods for their cavalry horses." Sarah looked up, surprised. "The Army? But they've always insisted on traditional breaking methods. Until they saw your results. Seems horses, like people, respond better to respect than force." Outside the lawyer's office, Copper Creek bustled with activity. The wedding was bringing visitors from across the territory, drawn as much by curiosity about the infamous Sarah McKinnon as by the celebration itself. Young women walked the streets in riding clothes without fear of judgment. The town council, now including 3 female members, had approved plans for a new schoolhouse that would teach both traditional subjects and practical ranching skills. "Look," Sarah said, pointing through the window. Betty Wilson was leading a group of young girls on horseback, all riding astride, all sitting tall and proud. A year ago, they would have been scandalized. Now they're teaching the next generation. The deed's final clause caught her eye. "This property shall serve as a haven for those seeking education, opportunity, and refuge from persecution." Legal language making permanent what their hearts had already decided. Maria burst into the office, her arms full of fabric. "Señorita Sarah, the dress or the riding outfit, whichever you choose, it needs fitting." Sarah laughed at James's deliberately averted eyes. "Still not telling you what I'm wearing," she teased. "Some traditions are worth keeping." "As long as they're chosen, not imposed," he replied, gathering the deed papers. "Speaking of choices, Rosa wants to perform a traditional Apache blessing alongside the church ceremony." "Perfect," Sarah said. "A bridge between worlds, just like us." They stepped out into the street where Mrs. Whitmore was directing the decoration of the town square. The wedding would be public, their love on display just as their defiance had been. Children were weaving flowers through the old chains from the judgment oak, transforming symbols of oppression into art. "Miss McKinnon," Betty called out, dismounting gracefully, "we've been practicing a special riding display for your wedding. Will you watch us rehearse?" Sarah glanced at Maria's armload of wedding preparations, then at James. He grinned and took the deed papers. "Go, I'll handle the legal details. Partnership, remember?" As Sarah walked toward the training corral, she heard whispers from some visiting women. "That's her, the one who changed everything." The words carried no judgment now, only admiration. The deed would be filed tomorrow, making official what love had already proven. The true partnership meant supporting each other's strengths, sharing both burdens and triumphs. The academy would open the week after the wedding, welcoming young women from across the country to learn, grow, and find their own paths. "Show me what you've learned," Sarah called to her students, watching them guide their horses into formation. Their faces shone with confidence, their backs straight, their spirits free. This was her real legacy, not just the changes in law or custom, but the light in these girls' eyes. Behind her, she heard James talking with the army officers who'd come to observe her training methods. "My wife's techniques," he said, the pride clear in his voice, "are revolutionizing how we think about both horses and humans." Wife. The word felt different now, shaped by the deed's promise of equality, by their shared vision of change. Sarah touched her engagement ring with its wooden heart, feeling the strength of roots growing deep, of love rising tall and free. Tomorrow they would review applications for the academy. Next week they would welcome their first students. The month after, they would host a conference on progressive ranching methods, their future stretched out before them, full of possibility. The deed was just paper, just words. But like the charter before it, it represented something profound, the power of choosing love over fear, growth over stagnation, partnership over dominance. Sarah watched her students ride, their horses moving in perfect harmony with their wishes, and smiled. Some revolutions began with battles. Theirs had begun with breaking chains and would continue with building bridges. The old oak tree stood transformed, its branches now shading a simple marble monument. Where chains had once hung, wildflowers bloomed. The plaque gleamed in the morning sun, its words a testament to how far they'd come. On this spot, courage faced cruelty, and love proved stronger than chains. Let all who rest in this shade remember, true strength lies not in binding others, but in helping them soar. Sarah stood before it on the anniversary of her ordeal, James's hand steady in hers. A year had changed everything. The town, their lives, the very meaning of this place. Young couples now courted beneath the oak's spread branches. Children played here without fear. The tree had become a symbol not of judgment, but of renewal. "Hard to believe it's only been a year," James said softly, touching the plaque. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "And sometimes," Sarah replied, "I still feel the chains." "Miss McKinnon, Mrs. Blackwood!" Betty Wilson rode up on her favourite mare, sitting tall and confident in the saddle. Behind her came a stream of riders, the Academy's first graduating class. 20 young women from territories across the West, all riding with the same proud grace that had once scandalized Copper Creek. They carried diplomas alongside their riding crops, proof that education knew no gender. "The governor's wife is here for the ceremony," Betty announced, practically glowing with excitement. "And 3 more territories want to establish academies of their own." Sarah watched her students dismount, remembering each of their arrivals. Some had come shy and stooped, weighted by years of being told to be less. Now they stood straight and strong, ready to carry the revolution of dignity back to their own towns. Mrs. Whitmore approached on foot, her stern black dress replaced by a practical riding skirt. The past year of co-chairing the commission had softened her edges, teaching her that authority could come from respect rather than fear. "The new students are settled in the dormitory," she reported. 45 this term. "We'll need to expand again." "Good," James said. "Change should grow." They gathered around the oak tree for the graduation ceremony. Sarah stood where she had once been chained, but now she raised her voice in celebration rather than defiance. A year ago, this tree represented fear of difference, fear of strength, fear of change, she began. Today, it stands for something else. The courage to grow, to learn, to become who you truly are. The graduates sat tall, their faces glowing, with pride and purpose. Among them were daughters of ranchers, bankers, and tribal leaders, even the sheriff's youngest girl, who a year ago wouldn't have dared dream of such freedom. "You came here to learn about horses," Sarah continued, "but you learned something more. You learned that gentleness isn't weakness, that strength doesn't require cruelty, that being true to yourself is the greatest victory of all." The governor's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Thomas Webb from the Gazette scribbled furiously, documenting this moment for history. Around them, the town had gathered to witness not just a graduation, but a continuation of their shared transformation. "Take what you've learned here," James added, "not just the skills, but the spirit. Show the world that change is possible, that traditions can grow, that love is stronger than fear." Rosa stepped forward, offering each graduate a small medicine pouch, wisdom from her people joining hands with new learning. Maria distributed roses from the garden where Sarah and James had first kissed. Mrs. Whitmore presented each young woman with a business license, legal proof of their right to practice their trades. The oak's leaves rustled overhead, nature's applause for human progress. Sarah touched her wooden ring, feeling the strength of roots and the promise of growth. "1 year ago," she said softly, "they tried to chain me here to break my spirit. Instead, they planted a seed of change that will flower for generations." As if in answer, a mourning dove landed on the branch where chains had hung, its song pure and free. The graduates raised their diplomas in salute, their futures spreading out before them like open prairie. "Ready to greet the new students?" James asked, offering his arm. Sarah took it, partner to partner, equal to equal. Behind them the oak tree stood tall against the blue sky, its shadows now offering shelter rather than shame, its strength nurturing growth rather than enforcing limits. They walked together toward the future they'd built, leaving the old oak to its new purpose, not as a place of judgment, but as a monument to the eternal truth that love, dignity, and courage will always break chains, always open hearts, always light the way toward change.